Hey everyone, welcome back. Last time, France chopped off its king, tried democracy, and somehow ended up with an emperor. Today, we meet that emperor. This is Napoleon Bonaparte, probably the most famous short king in all of history. Tiny problem with that, he wasn't actually short. He was around 5'6" or 7, completely average for a Frenchman back then. The tiny Napoleon idea came from British cartoons mocking him and a mix-up between French and English inches. So no, he wasn't a pocket-sized man, but he was a giant pain for every king in Europe. Here's the wild part. This guy started as a broke nobody from a tiny island, and in about 15 years, he ran most of Europe. He fought over 60 battles, wrote laws we still use today, and put a crown on his own head. And then he lost all of it, twice. Keep an eye on this scoreboard. It's basically all of Europe versus one man. They gang up on him 7 separate times, 7 whole coalitions. Respect, honestly. This is the rise and fall of Napoleon. Buckle up. It's a lot. It starts in 1769 on a rocky little island in the Mediterranean called Corsica. Fun fact, France bought Corsica from Italy just 1 year before Napoleon was born, so the most French man in history was almost born Italian. He even grew up speaking Italian. His family was minor nobility, which sounds fancy, but really meant technically posh, actually broke. Young Napoleon was smart, intense, and always a little angry. Great combo for a future conqueror. At age 9, he was shipped off to military school in mainland France. There, the rich French kids bullied him for being poor, for being Corsican, for his thick accent. So he did the pettiest, most effective thing possible. He outstudied all of them. He fell in love with one subject in particular: artillery, math, plus cannons, plus blowing things up. He graduated as an artillery officer at 16. Broke unknown, but an officer. For a few years, he was just a poor lieutenant, reading books, being broody, waiting for a chance. And then France handed him the biggest chance in history. It lost its mind. Because right as Napoleon's career started, the French Revolution exploded. A revolution needs soldiers. Suddenly, a broke young officer who's really good at cannons is very useful. And in the chaos, talent could shoot straight to the top. Perfect timing for an ambitious kid. His first big break came in 1793 at a port city called Toulon. Toulon had rebelled and let the British Navy sail right in. France needed it back, badly. A young Captain Napoleon showed up, looked at the map, and basically said, "You're all doing this wrong." His plan: grab that one hill, put cannons on it, and blast the British ships out of the harbor. It worked perfectly. The British fled, Toulon fell, and everyone suddenly knew his name. They promoted him to general. He was 24 years old. Then in 1795, a royalist mob tried to storm the government in Paris. Napoleon met them in the street with cannons and fired. It ended in minutes. Historians nicknamed it a whiff of grapeshot. Cold, but it made him the hero who saved the government. As a reward, they gave him command of the French army in Italy. This is where the legend really begins. Around the same time, he married a stylish older widow named Josephine. He was obsessed with her. He wrote her wild, desperate love letters from the battlefield. Big softy under the armor. The Italian army he inherited was small, hungry, unpaid, and losing. Not ideal. Napoleon gave a speech, promised them glory and food, and then actually delivered. He moved his army fast, insanely fast, and hit the enemy where they didn't expect it. Battle after battle, he beat bigger armies with speed and clever tricks. He knocked mighty Austria out of the war and sent treasure and art back to Paris. France went nuts for him. At 26, Napoleon was the most famous man in the country. The government back in Paris noticed too, and got a little nervous. A general this popular and this ambitious, that's the kind of guy who takes over, so they tried to get rid of him, politely. Their genius plan sent him far, far away, specifically to invade Egypt. Officially, it was to threaten British trade routes to India. Unofficially, please just leave. In 1798, he landed in Egypt and won a huge battle right by the pyramids. He also brought a small army of scientists to study everything. Weird flex, but it worked. They found the Rosetta Stone, the key that finally let us read ancient Egyptian writing. Quick myth check. Did Napoleon's soldiers shoot the nose off the Sphinx? Nope. It was already gone. Then it all went wrong. The British Navy showed up and destroyed his entire fleet. Napoleon and his whole army were now stranded in Egypt with with no ride home. Oops. So Napoleon did something bold, and honestly a little shady. He ditched his army and secretly sailed home. And here's the crazy part. Because the news was slow, France still thought he was winning. He came home a hero. Meanwhile, the government, that weak, corrupt directory, and was falling apart. Nobody trusted it. France was tired, broke, and quietly wishing for someone strong to just take charge. In November 1799, Napoleon and some allies staged a coup and shoved the government aside. It was messy. At one point he got shouted at and nearly panicked, but the soldiers backed him. Power grabbed. He set up a new government of 3 consuls and made very sure he was the one in charge. The title was First Consul. The job description was basically the boss. 10 years of revolution to get rid of one all-powerful ruler, and France just made a new one. But, and this is important, at first he was actually a really effective boss. Napoleon was a workaholic. He slept a few hours a night and ran the whole country like a project. He made peace, fixed the broke economy, and set up a national bank. His biggest legacy was a giant rule book, the Napoleonic Code. One clear set of laws for everyone, instead of a messy tangle of old local rules. It locked in some big revolution ideas, equality before the law, and no more special privileges just for being born noble. Careers were now open to talent, not just to whoever your dad was. Napoleon loved that idea. Makes sense. A broke Corsican kid rising to the top was literally that idea in action. Versions of that code are still used in France and around the world today. Genuinely huge. The people were thrilled. They voted to make him ruler for life. And Napoleon thought, why stop there? In 1804, he decided France needed an emperor. Guess who volunteered? He held a gigantic ceremony in Notre Dame and even invited the Pope to crown him. And then, at the last second, Napoleon took the crown from the Pope's hands and crowned himself. The message was loud and clear. Nobody gives me power. I take it. So a revolution that started by killing a king ended with an emperor crowning himself. History has a sense of humor, but say what you want, the broke kid from Corsica was now emperor of the French, and an emperor needs an empire. So Napoleon turned to the thing he did best, winning wars. The other kings of Europe were not okay with a self-made emperor next door, so they teamed up again. Britain, Austria, Russia, all lining up against France. Napoleon said, bring it. He built a massive, superbly trained force, the Grande Armée, and he marched it east. In 1805, near a town called Austerlitz, he fought 2 emperors at once, Russia and Austria. It's called the Battle of the Three Emperors, and it's considered his absolute masterpiece. He faked being weak, lured them into attacking, then smashed through their center. Total victory. Austerlitz made Napoleon look unstoppable. On land, honestly, he kind of was. There was just one enemy he could never reach. Britain, safe across the sea. Because a month before Austerlitz, Britain's navy wrecked his fleet at Trafalgar. So Napoleon ruled the land. Britain ruled the sea. Neither could finish the other off. Can't invade Britain? Fine. He tried to strangle its economy instead. He banned all of Europe from trading with it. This was the Continental System. Spoiler, it hurt Europe at least as much as Britain, and people just smuggled anyway. Meanwhile, Napoleon kept winning and kept redrawing the map of Europe however he liked. He handed out kingdoms to his own brothers and sisters like party favors. One brother got Spain, one got Holland, one got a chunk of Germany. Family business, but the business was Europe. He also shut down the 1,000-year-old Holy Roman Empire, just because he could. At his peak, around 1810, Napoleon controlled or bossed around most of continental Europe. He'd gone from broke Corsican kid to master of a continent. What could possibly go wrong? Turns out, running an empire built on winning means you can never, ever stop winning. The first crack opened in Spain. He put his brother on the throne, and Spain said absolutely not. The Spanish didn't fight one big battle. They fought everywhere, all the time. Hit and run forever. This new kind of war bled his army slowly for years. Napoleon himself called Spain the Spanish ulcer. There was also a personal problem. After all this, he still had no son to inherit the empire. So sadly, he divorced Josephine and married a young Austrian princess, who gave him a son. He finally had an heir, but his real problem was about to come from the east. Russia had quietly quit his trade blockade. To Napoleon, that was a betrayal that needed punishing. So in 1812, he gathered the largest army Europe had ever seen, around 600,000 men, and invaded Russia. This is where the story stops being funny for a while, because this campaign becomes one of the deadliest disasters in history. The Russians refused to fight the big battle he wanted. Instead, they retreated and burned everything behind them. No food, no shelter, no supplies left for his army. Just empty, burnt land, stretching on and on. There was one huge, brutal battle at Borodino. Tens of thousands died in a single day. Napoleon pushed on and finally took Moscow. He'd won, technically, but Moscow was nearly empty, and much of it soon burned. There was no one there to surrender to him. He waited for weeks for Russia to give up. Russia never did. And then winter came. The retreat through the Russian winter destroyed the Grande Armée. Cold, hunger, and constant attacks. Men froze where they fell. The army that entered Russia as 600,000 left as a broken remnant. Fewer than 1 in 10 of the men who marched in came back. It was a catastrophe on an almost unimaginable scale. Napoleon survived and rushed back to Paris. But the myth that he could not be beaten, that died in the snow. Europe smelled blood. If the invincible Napoleon could be broken, now was the time to pile on. Everyone he'd ever beaten teamed up at once. Russia, Prussia, Austria, Britain, the lot. In 1813, at Leipzig, the combined armies crushed him in the biggest battle of the whole era. They pushed him all the way back into France and then straight into Paris. In 1814, cornered and out of options, Napoleon gave up the throne and abdicated. The winners didn't kill him. Instead, they gave him a tiny island to rule, Elba. Yes, the man who ruled Europe was now emperor of one small island. It was basically a joke. And back in France, the old king's family returned to the throne like the revolution never happened. But Napoleon wasn't done. In 1815, he escaped Elba and sailed back to France. The king sent soldiers to stop him. Napoleon walked up alone, opened his coat, and basically said, "Shoot me then." Instead, the soldiers cheered and joined him. He marched into Paris without firing a shot. For about 100 days, Napoleon was emperor again. This wild comeback is called the 100 Days, but all of Europe instantly united one final time to end him for good. It came down to one last battle in 1815 near a village in Belgium called Waterloo. Against the British under Wellington, Napoleon nearly won all day. Then the Prussians arrived and tipped it. By nightfall, his army broke and ran. Waterloo was the end. To this day, meeting your Waterloo means your final defeat. This time, Europe took no chances. They exiled him to the middle of nowhere, a rock in the Atlantic called St. Helena. Thousands of miles from anywhere, guarded around the clock, there would be no third comeback. He spent his last years there writing his memoirs and honestly polishing his own legend. In 1821, Napoleon died on that island at 51, probably stomach cancer. So what did all of it actually mean? A lot, it turns out. His code reshaped law across the world. His wars spread revolution ideas everywhere his armies marched. He also accidentally lit the fire of nationalism. People conquered by France started asking, why not rule ourselves? He killed millions in his wars, and he crowned himself a king after a revolution against kings. All of that is true at the same time. A broke, bullied kid from a tiny island genuinely reshaped the entire world. For better and for worse. That's Napoleon. Before you go, hit subscribe and check out our other videos. The French Revolution, the Black Death, the Odyssey, and Timothy Dexter. Thanks for watching, and please, nobody invade Russia in winter. Bye.